Hi, and welcome to my channel, Shades of Sage, where I discuss all things motherhood. My name is Hashima, and today I am doing a requested video. A couple of people have asked for this video, a friend of mine and some other women, some other ladies here on YouTube, on how to wean. So today I'm going to go over how I did it, how long it took me to wean my children, and some tips for you for your weaning process. So if you'd like to know how to do that or how to get that process started with weaning your child or your baby, just keep watching. So let's get started. Just as a background, I am a mom of three. I have 3 children, and I breastfed all of them, exclusively breastfed all of them for at least a year. I went a little bit longer with my oldest, and I did wean them all. So I'm just gonna go over how I went about that. My original goal for all of my children was to breastfeed them all for at least 2 years. That did not happen because I got pregnant pretty quickly postpartumly with all 3 of them, and so I weaned each one because I knew that I had to prepare to breastfeed another baby, and I was not into tandem feeding. That's why I weaned them, and so I really knew what day, or like I had already a day in mind that I wanted to stop breastfeeding. And so because I knew that ahead of time before I even started the weaning process, I think that made it a little bit easier for me when I did go to finally wean them. So my first step when I went to wean was to cut down the feedings to at least 3 times a day. That was easiest for me to do that. At the end of our breastfeeding journey, we kind of were already doing that anyway, but when I started the process of weaning officially, then I was only breastfeeding them for breakfast, lunch, or either before a nap and then before they went to sleep at night. So once we were on that schedule of only breastfeeding 3 times a day, then I cut out 1 feeding session every week. So it really did depend on the child when I felt like they were ready to give up at least that 1 session. And the easiest one for me was to cut out lunch. So that's the one that I cut out first. And in place of me breastfeeding at lunchtime, I would give them a sippy cup of milk. And my preferred milk for my children is almond milk. So I would give them almond milk. I actually use silk vanilla milk. It's sweet, and it does, in my opinion, taste similar, at least to my breast milk. I have tasted my own breast milk. And so I thought that the taste was similar, and they took that sippy cup with no issues. So once I cut out the lunch breastfeeding session, the next one that I cut out was the morning session. So I was still breastfeeding at night, still breastfeeding in the morning, but then when I was ready to cut out the morning session, then I gave them again a sippy cup of almond milk, and then they would have a sippy cup of almond milk in the morning when they would wake up. They would have a sippy cup of almond milk for lunch, or like right before they took their nap, and then at nighttime I was breastfeeding them. And that would last for about a week or so until they adjusted, until they got used to it. And then the last feeding that I cut out was nighttime. I felt like that was the hardest for both of us to cut out, because it's just something about that nighttime ritual, just breastfeeding your baby and watching them fall asleep and go to sleep at breast and then putting them down. It was really a comfort thing, I felt like. So that, at least for me and my kids, was the hardest session to cut out. So that's the one I saved for last, and that usually took like a week, maybe even 2 weeks. But in total, to wean my kids, it took me about 2 months. So the first month, like for my sons, I knew I wanted to wean them by their first birthday. So I knew on their first birthday, that night was gonna be their last breastfeeding session. So it took me about 2 months, because the first month, when they were about 10 months old, that's when I worked on night weaning to make sure that they weren't waking up throughout the night to breastfeed anymore. My kids, they slept in the room with me until they were at least 1, and so they could smell me. They always wanted the breast milk, and they would always wake up. So they didn't sleep through the night very early because I was home with them and we shared a room together. They did feed throughout the night. So that was my first step in my weaning process, was to make sure that they were night weaned. Once they were night weaned, and that usually took about a month for me, but once they were night weaned, that's when I started with just the 3 times a day breastfeeding session. So like I said, morning, noon, and night. Then cutting out the noon breastfeeding session, then cutting out the morning breastfeeding session, and finally cutting out the nighttime breastfeeding session. So in total, for all of them, it took me about 2 months to wean. So that is how I weaned all of my children from exclusively breastfeeding. And now I'm going to go into some tips for you on how you can start the weaning process with your child. So my first tip, like I just mentioned, is to work on night weaning first. If your child is not already sleeping through the night, if your child is still waking up through the night, it's going to be a little bit harder for you, in my opinion, to day wean if they're still waking up at nighttime to eat. So work on that first. And a way that I did this was to comfort them in other ways that didn't involve them having something throughout the night. Some moms will give another form of milk throughout the night, but for me, I wanted them to sleep through the night that whole time. So I didn't want them waking up at all to eat at all. So if my baby was in the room and they were crying and I knew I was working on weaning, I would pick them up, hold them a little bit, maybe sing to them, rock them side to side, just other comfort measures that I could do with them instead of feeding. And a lot of times that did help. If they were crying too hysterically though, I did give in on those occasions. So like I said, it did take me about a month to night wean my children. But you know, use your own discretion, use your best judgment. But eventually, they will get used to sleeping longer stretches. So say your baby wakes up at a certain time every night. If you know that time they're about to wake up or that time that they usually wake up, you can breastfeed them before that time. And I do have a video about dream feeds. So if you would like to see that video and what dream feeds are, I will link that down below or up in the iCards up here. But that can help you to also allow your baby to sleep for longer stretches as well. So that's my first tip, to work on night weaning first and then work on the day weaning. Next tip, which is probably the most important, is to go slowly. I do not recommend cold turkey. I don't recommend that because it will hurt your breast so much. You will be in so much pain. Remember, again, breastfeeding is supply and demand. So however often your baby eats, that's how often your breasts are filling up with milk. If you go cold turkey for a baby that's eating frequently throughout the day, in a few hours, at least a day or two, your breasts are gonna be so hard. They're gonna be backed up with milk, and that's not something that you want. It is painful. So I say go as slow as you can. I know there's certain situations where a mom may need to wean her baby cold turkey, like if she gets on a new medication that's not safe for breastfeeding, or if she's separated from her baby, if she's in a hospital or something like that. Obviously in those cases you are going cold turkey, and you can pump a little bit to get some of that milk out, or you can do the hot or cold compresses or take the medicine that dry up your breast. But you don't want to pump too much because you don't want to signal your body to continue to produce the same amount of milk that your baby is normally eating. So you want to be careful with that if you're using that to relieve your breast. But basically, if you can, as much as you can, try to take it slowly and eliminate each feeding either days at a time or a week at a time, because that will help you or allow you to feel a little bit more comfortable through the weaning process. So my next tip is to cut the easiest feeding first. So like I mentioned, for me and my kids, lunch was the easiest one to cut. I feel like that's the one they missed the least, and nighttime was the hardest one for us to cut. So whatever it is for your baby, your morning feeding may be the hardest one for them to cut. Maybe they really enjoy, and maybe you really enjoy breastfeeding them first thing in the morning. So whichever one you feel like is the easiest to cut, or whichever one you feel like will be the least noticeable to cut in your routine, that's the one I recommend cutting first, and then go to the next one and then to the next one. So my next tip is to find other ways to bond with your baby that are not centered around eating or not centered around breastfeeding. So maybe it's you guys learning a new activity, maybe even buying some new games or some new toys that you guys can do in place of breastfeeding. Definitely don't go to the places that you normally breastfeed. So if you feed all around the house, I know that kind of be hard, but say you have a special chair or a special room that you go to when you have your breastfeeding sessions, try not to go to those areas on the times that you don't plan on breastfeeding your baby. So try to find a new activity, try to find a new way to bond with your baby that doesn't include food or breastfeeding. My next tip is introducing a cup. So for me, my children were older when I was weaning, so 10, 11 months when we were weaning. I said I didn't use bottles, so when I wanted them to drink milk, I just introduced a sippy cup. I felt like that was easiest than me trying to introduce a bottle and then take it away, you know, a few months later. So if your baby is of age where they can have a cup and where they can hold a cup and use a cup, I would recommend using a sippy cup. If you are using bottles, you still can put whatever kind of milk that you're using in place of your breast milk in the bottle, of course. But if your child is a little bit older and you don't use bottles, I would say just skip the bottles and go straight to sippy cup. That's probably the easiest way for them to still get their milk while you're not breastfeeding. So my next tip for weaning is distraction. Try to keep your kids distracted. So I am a stay-at-home and work-at-home mom, and so my kids are around me all day long. So they just had like open access. They just had free range when it came to breastfeeding. So you want to keep them distracted. They do come to you to feed. Like some people say, don't offer and don't resist. So you can try that. But other forms of distraction is, I've heard one mom put band-aids on her boobs and said she had boo-boos, and then her child wouldn't want to have any breast milk. If your child is older, you can talk to your child and tell them no more milk, or the milk's all gone, or there's no more milk for you. You can say those kind of things to your child. Or if your child is reaching for your breast and trying to get some breast milk, trying to nurse, then you can just maybe try to take them to another area, maybe pull out some toys, or make silly faces with them, or take out some arts and crafts. So whatever you need to do to keep them distracted from wanting to nurse at that time when you know you're working on weaning. And again, those tips are mostly for older children because that's what experience I do have with weaning. So if your child is younger, maybe like 6 months or younger, they really seem like they're hungry and you are trying to wean, I say give them maybe a form of milk and whatever it is that you're using, a cup or a bottle, at those times that you know that you're trying to wean but you don't want to actually breastfeed them. Another tip that I have is put on harder to nurse clothing, or clothing that's harder for you to nurse in. So usually I just have on one of my maxi dresses and nightgowns, and that's really easy to breastfeed in. It's one of the reasons why I had them. But when I knew that I was weaning, I put on clothes that were a little bit harder for them to grab the boobs, because older kids especially would just go in there and take the boobs out like they own everything. And so if you put on harder to reach clothes, at least if you put them up, it will kind of discourage them from breastfeeding. So like the boat neck tops, you can try those. The turtlenecks if you have to. Try to put on different clothing, because normally if you're breastfeeding, you have on maybe like your nursing tank top, or you have on something that's buttoned down like this dress here that's easy and accessible for you to be able to breastfeed your baby. So just put back on your regular tops, your regular clothing, so it's not as easy for your child to get in there and breastfeed. Another tip that I have is to have your partner or have the father of your child, whoever else is there with you, do the feedings or do the routines that are normally centered around breastfeeding. So if that's at nighttime, you're usually the one that breastfeeds your baby, and then maybe you guys read a story and you do bath time and you're putting the baby to bed. Maybe have your partner do those things instead, so that you kind of break that association of breastfeeding with the ritual. So have someone else do that. And even when it comes to like giving your child maybe a bottle or a cup of milk, whatever it is that you are using, maybe have someone else do that instead of it coming from you, because it makes it a little bit easier for them to take it, because they see you and they just associate mom with milk. And so if you give them a cup of milk or you give them a bottle of milk, sometimes they will look at you like, what are you doing? You know, pull that booby out. So try to have someone else do those things, at least to introduce it. I think that makes it a whole lot easier. If you are a single mom, of course you have to do those things yourself. But like I said, again, go to areas that you normally wouldn't breastfeed in. Try to do things that you normally don't do. Try to do different activities that aren't centered around breastfeeding for your child, and kind of break that association so that they see you as mom and not just mom and milk. And my last tip is, so if you're a pumping mama, you want to limit your pumping sessions, and you definitely want to eventually stop pumping if you are planning on weaning. So if you are a pumping mom and you have pumping sessions, try to cut down your sessions again to the same amount of times that your baby is feeding, or the same amount of times to get you down to at least 3 times a day, so that your pumping sessions coincide when the baby eats. And then eventually you don't want any more pumping sessions. But if you do have like leftover milk, or you have a supply of milk in your freezer, definitely use your supply first before you introduce the new milk or whatever form of milk that you are going to be using in place of your breast milk. Again, that's for like children that are like 1 and under. Once your child is 1, they can have other forms of milk. So whatever you decide, that's up to your discretion. That's totally up to you. But if you have breast milk in the freezer, your child can drink that for as long as you have your stash, or until your stash is gone. But if you are pumping, you definitely want to limit the amount of time that you're pumping, and you want to make sure that, again, that you're doing that slowly as well, because it is still supply and demand even when it comes to pumping, and you want to be able to basically be weaned from pumping and weaned from breastfeeding exclusively as well. So another tip that I have for weaning is cabbage leaves. Now, when I did my last weaning session with my son, like I said, his last session was on his birthday that night, and the next day I put cabbage leaves in my bra. So you want to wear a bra, because even though you will only breastfeeding once a day or maybe 2 times a day, your breast will still fill up with milk at those times. So like day 2 and day 3 is when you'll feel some engorgement. So keep a bra on so that your breasts are kind of compact. And then I bought like a whole head of cabbage. I put that in the refrigerator, and then I would take leaves out and put them inside of my bra right directly on my nipples, so that something about the cabbage leaves, it like helps to soak up and draw the milk out of your breast. So I did do that, I think for about 3 to 4 days, even up to a week if you want to do that. So you can leave those leaves in your bra. Once they start to wilt or once they start to get warm, you just want to swap them out for a new or fresh pair of leaves. So about every day, I think I changed it every 4 hours or like 3 or 4 times a day. So really it depends, it's up to you. But cabbage leaves definitely do help with the weaning process. It helps you feel a little bit more comfortable. And I did do the cabbage leaf with all 3 of my kids. I do feel like it helped a whole bunch. That is all that I have for this video. I hope that this was helpful. Main thing to take away is try to do it slowly. And I did forget to mention that when you're weaning, it is also an emotional process. So remember, when you're breastfeeding, your hormones are still at elevated levels, not as the same as when you were pregnant, but there's still hormones that go into making your breast milk and keeping your breast supply up. And so when you wean and as you begin to produce less breast milk, you will notice some changes in your emotions. That's totally to be expected. You may feel sad. I know for my first, I felt really sad because one, I wasn't ready to wean her yet. That's just something that I decided would be best because I knew I was having another baby soon. And you may just really miss that bond of breastfeeding with your child. So breastfeed as long as you want to. There's no time limit that you have to wean. Breastfeed as long as you want to, but if you are planning on weaning, you're thinking about it, or you're going through the process, remember that your emotions will probably take a hit. You may experience sadness, you may experience some tears or whatever the case may be, but know that it's normal. And as your hormones regulate back to not being pregnant and not breastfeeding, you will feel a little bit better. With my last, I didn't have any sadness at all because I was just ready and done to be breastfeeding because I breastfed for 4 years straight. So, but again, remember that it is a process. So be kind and be gentle with yourself. Maybe do a little more self-care. Even for you, you may need to discover, or you may need to find some different rituals that you can do in place of your breastfeeding sessions with your child. But your bond will still be there. Even though you're not breastfeeding, you will find other things that you guys can do, other ways to bond with each other. So don't be worried about that. It will come. So I hope that that answered any questions. This is from my experience, how I was able to wean my 3 children. If I didn't mention something that you wanted to know, or if you have any additional questions, definitely leave them down in the comments, because there may be different situations or circumstances out there that I didn't go over or that I didn't mention in this video. So definitely just leave a comment down below and I'll do my best to answer them. And just know that even though you have weaned, so even though you're not breastfeeding your child anymore, it does take your body some time to stop completely making breast milk. So sometimes even when my son is like really crying, when he's really like hysterical, my breast still will leak even now. And I'm about 2 months, almost 3 months from weaning him. So just know that it does take a while for your breast to stop producing milk totally, and so it also takes a while for your hormones to go back to normal levels too. Just wanted to state that so that you'll be prepared. If you like this video, give me a great big thumbs up. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. It really helps my channel. I have some more requested videos that I want to get out, so please be patient with me, because a bunch of people have requested certain videos of me and I am working my way through them, so just be on the lookout for those. I also want to mention that in celebration for my 1 year on YouTube, which will be in April, so I know it's a few months early, but I do want to do a live Q&A here on YouTube about breastfeeding. So a live Q&A where you can ask me questions if you are breastfeeding, or maybe you're thinking about breastfeeding, or maybe you're having some issues with breastfeeding. I want to be able to chat with you other moms out there. I am a doula. I have 3 children. I've breastfed all of them. And I'm not a lactation consultant, but wherever I can help out, or if you have any questions that I can answer for you, or even if you just want to join the live for some breastfeeding support, or maybe to share your breastfeeding stories, or just anything motherhood in general, I will be doing a YouTube live, so be on the lookout for that. Details will be forthcoming. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye. Associate mom. If you give them a pup, come on, touch him. Try to do different activities that normally don't. And I did forget to mention, oh my God. crazy.